Good afternoon. I call to order the September 16th, 2025 regular meeting of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. For the record, my name is Marie Bjornberg and I serve as chair of the commission. Just a reminder to silence your cell phones and other electronic devices and to speak clearly into the microphone when speaking at the dais or giving testimony. Would the clerk please call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum?
Commissioner Alexander.
Present.
Booty is absent. Hare.
Present.
Corrado.
Present.
Melblom.
Present.
Rodriguez.
Present.
Thomas.
Present.
Wallace is absent. Vice Chair Maston.
Present.
Chair Bjornberg.
Present.
There are 8 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have quorum and that Commissioners Booty and Wallace provided proper notice that they have a conflict this afternoon and their absence is excused. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for this meeting. We will work from the agendas that are available by the clerk, and I will go through the agenda and sort out which items will be discussed and which items will be put on the consent agenda to be approved as recommended by staff and without further discussion. Item number 4 is 4620 Fremont Avenue South, Ward 13. This application is for a certificate of appropriateness and will be on consent unless someone wants to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation. Item number 5 is 2100 Milwaukee Avenue, Ward 6. This application is for a certificate of appropriateness and will be on consent unless someone wants to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation. Item number 6 is Heritage Preservation Text Amendment, all wards. This application is for a text amendment and will be discussed. Item number 7 is beach naming request from Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. This item is for comment and will be discussed. So the proposed agenda is the consent agenda, which will include item number 4, 4620 Fremont Avenue South, Ward 13, and item number 5, 2100 Milwaukee Avenue, Ward 6. Is there any opposition from commissioners to the staff recommendations for these items? Is there anyone in the public that wishes to speak in opposition to these items? Hearing no opposition to placing these items on consent, we will approve these consent items in one motion at the start of the meeting. The following items will have staff presentation, public comment, and commission discussion and action. Item number 6, Heritage Preservation Text Amendment, all wards. The following item will have staff presentation, commission discussion without a public hearing. Item number 7, beach naming request from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the proposed agenda?
Melblom so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Melblom. Is there a second?
Maston seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Maston. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? The agenda is approved. Our next order of business will be to approve the minutes from our September 2nd, 2025 meeting. May I have a motion to approve these minutes?
Thomas so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Is there a second?
Alexander seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Alexander. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions, including commissioners who were absent? The minutes are approved. Before I open the hearing to public comments, let me summarize the process. First, we will act on the consent agenda we just set. Once items on the consent agenda are approved, the commission is done with those items and applicants may contact planning staff tomorrow about next steps. After the consent agenda items are approved, we will take each remaining agenda item in order. Planning staff will present its reports and commissioners may ask questions of staff. Then I will open for public comments and we will hear from the applicants and commissioners may ask questions of the applicant. After that, we will invite public comment. If you wish to speak, we need you to do 2 things. Please be sure to sign up on the sheet over by the clerk. If you haven't done this already, you can do so afterwards. When you come up to testify, you must state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments specific to the application before us today. If you have materials to hand out, please give them to our committee clerk so that they can be distributed to the commission and entered into the record. Do not approach the commissioners on the dais. After public comments are complete, I will close the comments and commissioners will deliberate and act on the applications before us. I'll now open the public hearing on the consent agenda items. Item number 4, 4620 Fremont Avenue South, Ward 13, and item number 5, 2100 Milwaukee Avenue, Ward 6. Again, do commissioners oppose staff recommendation for these items? Are there any members of the public who oppose the staff recommendation for these items? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing on the consent agenda items. May I have a motion to approve staff findings and recommendations for these items?
Corrado so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Corrado. Is there a second?
Hare seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Hare. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? These items are approved as recommended by staff on the agenda, and applicants may contact planning staff about next steps. Our next item is item number 6, Heritage Preservation Text Amendment, all wards. The staff report is presented by Rob Skalecki.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Rob Skalecki, Senior City Planner in the Historic Preservation section of CPED. Today I'm presenting the Chapter 599 Ordinance Text Amendment Update, which has, of course, been well known to all Commissioners for over a year now. This has been a long process, and staff is certainly pleased to be here in front of you today to present it for HPC's vote on adoption. As we mentioned in the past, just some background on the text amendment. So as you all know, in 1972, the city adopted a local heritage preservation ordinance and encouraged us to allow the study and designation, protection of properties that are significant to the city's built and cultural heritage. So in the past 53 years, the city has designated over 195 individual landmarks and 20 locally designated historic districts. Of course, our program operates within the Certified Local Government program as a municipality that has demonstrated a commitment to preservation and local history. The current preservation ordinance is, as we mentioned, Title 23, Chapter 599 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances, and planning staff, specifically our team, mostly use this to administer the city's preservation program. So Chapter 599 was last comprehensively updated in 2001, as again staff has stated in the past. So since 2001, practices and processes in historic preservation have changed. So all of Chapter 599 is proposed to be repealed and replaced in its entirety. Some articles will remain with just minor revisions, while others have been completely reorganized and rewritten as part of this. To summarize HPC's involvement in the past, so on October 22nd, 2024, our team brought the first draft of Chapter 599 to HPC for your initial comments and feedback to consider during the drafting phases. So we were able to incorporate some of those, and then we brought back a revised draft to you all in March of 2025. And then just to note, on May 15, 2025, the HPC again discussed and commented on the draft at the HPC's retreat meeting. So from that point, staff have addressed changes that have been determined through consultation and guidance with the city attorney's office, other planning staff, CPED leadership, external historic preservation stakeholders, And most recently, we've been coordinating on changes with the Office of the City Clerk. So as I mentioned earlier, all of Chapter 599 is proposed to be repealed and replaced. The following changes that I note in the following slides aren't a complete list of what's going to be changed, but they are meant to comprehensively capture what is proposed for changes. And the final draft of the document, of course, is included in the attachments, and the changes were outlined in the staff report. So I will just summarize those here today, which are included in the staff report. So we are adding definitions for a few different items that didn't have definitions previously, terms that we use frequently in our field or have come across, through different reviews of needing clarification on what something means. We've also updated definitions to be more consistent with contemporary terms and interpretations. So just a few examples of those, just to make sure that we were clarifying what we were discussing when we mentioned those terms. We did update fees to be more consistent with the current costs of other planning applications, adjusting for inflation over the past 10 to 25 years, depending on when an application fee was first determined early in the 2000s. So fee increases were determined to minimize fee increases on smaller properties while also taking into account new application types and a new combined fee tier for properties from 0 to 9,999 square feet in size. So we also removed the postage and publication fee requirement for public hearing applications. So this is something that was removed from City Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment applications many years ago, but never updated for preservation applications. And these fees are really just intended to ensure a degree of cost recovery while attempting to avoid being burdensome for property owners and anyone who's investing in the city, and especially in our historic resources in the city. We are planning to remove sections of code that are rarely or no longer utilized. So in particular, we point out two areas, and those are transfer of development rights, formerly Article 9, and also conservation districts, formerly Article 13. So transfer of development rights is really a tool that we haven't come across, and also, as noted, there's kind of some overlap in zoning language, which kind of makes it obsolete to include in Chapter 599, so that's part of the reason why that's been removed here. Also with conservation districts, this was a tool that was developed 12 years ago, and since that was developed, the city has not developed or designated a conservation district. And this section of code is really confusing for a lot of property owners and applicants when the terms are so similar to what a historic district is. So with that, staff really prefer on focusing on historic designations and potentially finding a different method for establishing conservation districts in the future. We are planning to align the appeal and council adoption processes to be more consistent with other planning division processes. So this does include allowing appeals for nominations and requiring city council, as opposed to you all as the HPC, to make the final decision on historic design guidelines. So again, we're doing this to be more consistent with where other areas of planning are seeking decisions from decision-making bodies, and also at the guidance of the city attorney's office. We're also adding a new article to outline the role of the Heritage Preservation Commission and the mayor that you both play in the nomination stage for National Register of Historic Places nominations. So federal laws is clear on local participation for the National Register process, and Minneapolis as a certified local government really has to be specific in how we review these and how we document that and how we respond to them. So this article that's included will help explain the HPC's role, the city's role, and the mayor's role in the National Register of Historic Places listing process. We're also reconsidering requirements for the following sections to streamline and/or clarify review processes and procedures. So this was the area in the staff report that had a long list of items. So a lot of this text here really just mirrors that. The first is identifying potential landmarks and potential historic districts. So we want to codify a way to formally document potential historic resources that includes both landmarks and historic districts. And this is being done to be more transparent with members of the public. We're also establishing that a property must be determined a potential historic resource before a nomination application can be submitted to the HPC. That's unless a nomination is being submitted by an elected official who can nominate, which would be a council member or the mayor. For reviewing demolitions, this is an area that's a bit longer in text, but it is an area that staff thought was important to clarify. It's one of the main areas of text that we pointed out initially that needs clarification in the rewrite of the ordinance. So the first item is requiring all demolitions of designated properties, so that includes individual landmarks and buildings located in historic districts, to be submitted as separate applications from historic design review. So currently, any designated property that is seeking demolition would be submitted through a certificate of appropriateness, and that can be confusing because, as we know, most commonly certificates of appropriateness are not evaluating demolition. When it comes to that, staff believed that when looking at these applications, really there's evaluation of two different things, and that deserve to be separated within the review process. Another item is clarifying demolition review processes for properties that are not designated but have been determined to be potential historic landmarks within a potential historic district. That's also an item that's come up in the past where we have potential historic districts and potential historic landmarks, and we need clarification both for property owners and the HPC on where in the processes those both belong and the review processes for reviewing demolitions of these potential historic resources. So staff expanded and clarified the findings under 599-930, application for demolition of designated property. So language has been clarified to allow for a demolition of a designated property application to be denied and studied for individual landmark status if HPC finds the property to be individually a potential historic resource that embodies significance worthy of designation exploration that's already not considered in a current designation. So as we know in our field, there are sometimes things that are recognized for a certain history, and in considering that history and a property's being brought forward for demolition, there could be a different history that allows the property to be considered individually for landmark consideration, where it could be looked at through an HPC review. So we wanted to clarify kind of how that process is, what that entails to be able to go through that process. We also added text to clarify that demolition of a designated property is the application that's needed to authorize a demolition for a property under interim protection. So that would be a very rare situation where a property is under interim protection, studied for landmark status, and then an application would come forward to demolish it within that time. This is just clarifying which application would be submitted for a property under interim protection. We did rename the current demolition of historic resource application to demolition of a potential historic resource. That's just to be more transparent about what is actually being reviewed. And sometimes the term historic resource can be confusing when we're talking about, in these situations, properties that are not designated but are being reviewed for demolition. We plan to streamline findings for both demolition applications to be more intuitive and consistent with the intent of the preservation ordinance. So the findings really aim to preserve buildings and structures that are structurally safe, retain significance and historic integrity, and prioritize evaluating rehabilitation. We are also clarifying the findings and recommendations required for the demolition of a single property that is part of a potential historic district, noting how that property how that potential district could be nominated. So if a property communicates the history of a potential district but is not individually eligible for landmark consideration, we now have a more clear process on how that could potentially move forward with the possibility for a demolition delay as stated in the ordinance rewrite. We're also clarifying the period of decision for demolitions for potential historic resources to be 5 years. So currently there's no decision marker for that. So if a property is coming forward for demolition of potential historic resource and the HPC denies that, but it's not demolished within those 5 years, then it could potentially be reconsidered following that. For nominating landmarks in historic districts, the requirements for noticing and application materials have been updated to ensure that properties that are coming forward for nomination really do have sufficient materials to be considered for nomination. So there's a requirement in place that the property must be a potential historic resource for someone to bring it forward for nomination, and the exception to that is if you are a council member or the mayor who may submit a nomination directly to CPED staff without having that kind of starting point. So we also clarified the language to state the percentage of people with legal or equitable interest that are needed to nominate a historic district. So it's going to be a simple majority here. Adding findings to approve a nomination as well. Those are things that I think in the past HPC has maybe struggled with too. How do we have the right findings to make sure we're approving a nomination? Hopefully those have been clarified in the text amendment. With interim protection, the timeline was increased to 16 months, but there is no option to extend it longer. So currently it is a year's time, but there is an option to extend it longer. This does not mean that, all interim protection timelines will go to 16 months. Usually staff can get everything through within that year's timeline, but it just adds an extra bit of time to be more realistic in what that process all entails when a property is under interim protection, to be able to write the designation study, bring it through the applicable review processes, and then have it get on an HPC and council schedule. Another item to clarify is that interim protection for potential landmarks still covers the review of exterior alterations like it does currently, but in potential historic districts that are under interim protection, only demolition of properties will be reviewed going forward. For designating landmarks in historic districts, staff did add findings to approve a designation of a landmark or historic district. We did remove City Planning Commission's review and comment on a designation. We added procedures for enlarging but not reducing boundaries and removing a landmark from designation in the event of fire or other peril. So that was carefully considered based on our requirements as a certified local government and in discussion with the City Attorney's Office. We added a defined period in which City Council has to make a decision on a designation following the HPC's recommendation. So Council now has 180 days to take final action on a designation following the HPC's recommendation. So if a decision is not made within that time, or the designation is denied, a new nomination for that same designated property may not be submitted for a period of 3 years. We also added sections to clarify how to amend designations, because that's something that had been brought up to staff in the past of how this would go about being completed if it's ever brought forward. So should components of a designation study need to change following a formal designation, this part states how periods of significance, contributing and non-contributing resources, and criteria of significance will be evaluated and recorded through either administrative decisions or public hearing processes and City Council adoption. For historic design review applications for designated properties, so this is another area where a lot of change was taken into consideration and ended up in the final draft. So a single administrative preservation application will be used for scopes of work that are affecting historic materials that have a visual impact on the property, but would maybe not be extensive enough to require public hearing. So there are going to be some items that in the past would come to HPC for a certificate of appropriateness that now can be reviewed administratively through an administrative application that does have a fee. So many items also that are reviewed through a certificate of a no change will only require a permit review. So again, our certificate of no change is staff's administrative application. There's no fee to that, but it is an application submission. And there are a lot of scopes of work that staff will now be able to review just through permit review, and this is really consistent with how a lot of areas of CPAD already operate for their own permit reviews. So this is planning to reduce administrative processing times for applicants, for property owners, and really allowing staff to focus on direct reviews and direct correspondence with applicants and property owners on permit reviews. In addition to that, so guidance for application requirements and procedures will exist within administrative documents that are not solidified in Chapter 599. So that's something that staff has been working on behind the scenes to have those developed. We hope to have kind of different tables that clarify which scopes of work require certain applications for property owners and applicants to really hopefully clarify what we're evaluating, what we're looking at, and which changes will require, what route for any given applicant and project. Also to note, so the historic variance tool has been renamed as a historic exception. This is just to differentiate the tool from a zoning variance. In that situation, the term variance really does have legal ramifications on what that term means based on state and local law. So the tool itself really doesn't change. It can still be used as we have been using it, but we wanted to change the name just to make sure that we are clearly differentiating it and making sure that it can be used, as it has in the past for certain scopes of work. And lastly here, the list of items that I mentioned earlier at the end is enforcement for unpermitted and or unapproved work. So this is just updating enforcement under Chapter 599 to really clearly link it to Title I, Chapter 2, General Administrative Enforcement Procedures. So with that, as you all may have noticed, the staff report format is a little bit different for text amendments and updates to the ordinance. So staff did use a format that is more consistent with how other planning staff would use an analysis to bring forward a change to the ordinance. So we do have these items here that staff noted in the staff report. As far as the reason for the amendment, we've stated this a lot, not only today, but over the past year or so. The ordinance has not been updated comprehensively since 2001. So the purpose of the amendment is really to get the ordinance into the present day, make sure it's useful, make sure it adheres to the latest standards and practices. Also, the amendment serves to streamline and clarify processes and procedures that are related to heritage preservation regulations. So this is consistent with ensuring the ordinance continues the identification and protection of important historic and cultural properties in the city, while also allowing that clear guidance and revised processes that serve property owners and residents better. For consequences in denying the amendment, we really want to stress this. The heritage preservation regulations have not been comprehensively updated since 2001. So this really leaves staff with an outdated ordinance that is really no longer effective to serve the public in the present day. So denying or delaying this amendment would lead to longer wait times for reviews for property owners, inconsistencies with state and federal preservation guidance, inconsistencies with revisions to Title 20 zoning code that were made in the past 5 years to implement the 2040 plan, continued uncertainty surrounding many of the processes and applications of the city's heritage preservation program. So, this program has been a part of local law for over 50 years and has helped protect nearly 200 landmarks and 20 historic districts. The volume of resources and the city's duty to provide clear and responsible guidance really can't be further supported by an ordinance that was drafted in 2001. What adverse effects may result for the adoption of the amendment? So staff have really been cautious to try to minimize any possible effects that the amendment could bring. So one possible adverse effect is with certain processes being administrative. Those reviews wouldn't have public hearings and therefore, wouldn't be as publicly accessible for comment and for viewing. In addition to that, fees are overall planned to be raised. However, we really tried to make sure that costs have been restructured in an attempt to minimize cost burdens on owners of smaller properties and to get up to date with changes in costs that have occurred over the past 10 to 25 years. And this is consistent with changes to land use application fees that have undergone, fee increases in the past 5 years. So we really wanted to make sure that prices were fair but could increase with inflation over time. And also, along with that, we hope that those fees will be made easier to understand and calculate just by condensing the fees themselves. So we mentioned we no longer have the individual postage calculations with that to go. Everyone's different for whichever application comes forward. Now, this will at least kind of solidify the fees for an application. How does the amendment relate to other city ordinances? We mentioned this just recently here. So through the land use rezoning study that updated zoning code regulations in 2023 for comprehensive plan consistency, there are a lot of changes that need to happen to Chapter 599 to make sure that those two are linked and in step with each other. In addition to that, we just want to clarify too that a lot of our reviews are also being reviewed by different departments. So with that, we want to make sure that as other departments have updated parts to their relative sections of the ordinance, that city staff will also be able to have the most up-to-date text that makes sense to fit in with those other areas of the Code of Ordinances. And for timing of the proposed amendment and why, so again, we haven't updated this for a very long time, and the thorough update is really overdue. So processes and preservation regulations have shifted over time. Preservation staff's capabilities have grown to better serve property owners and applicants directly through administrative reviews. Development and growing interest in office to residential conversion projects in recent years have often turned to historic properties and federal incentives to bring these projects to fruition. So we're looking at historic preservation tax incentives. And with that, we do make sure that streamlined processes for preservation reviews are there for property owners who are looking to use those different incentives to make sure that they can complete commercial to residential projects in some of these buildings in an effective timeline. And how does this amendment compare to practices in other cities? I don't think staff has talked about this too much. I know we mentioned it earlier on with HPC on kind of different cities we looked at. We did look at a handful of different cities, and they were chosen to kind of pick a variety that may have similarities in, metro population, statewide importance, cultural, regional similarities, in some of them climate, in some of them histories of development or redevelopment. With that, so staff drafted 599 in a way that really addresses specific concerns to the city of Minneapolis and residents of this city while kind of looking outward and seeing what other cities have done. So we did draw on these cities for looking up, similar processes for demolition delays of individual properties for potential historic districts or landmark status. Also, when looking at how to nominate properties, how application reviews are done, even names of applications, and also just the fees as well. Those are all things that we looked at among our peer cities to make sure what we're doing was consistent, but at the same time, we didn't want to rely too much on kind of outward study just because we were very certain of the issues that needed to be addressed in our own city within our own rewrite, and that's kind of what kicked off the whole process. The last point here, just how will this amendment implement the comprehensive plan? So we did pick a few areas of the comprehensive plan where this amendment is really goes together with those and falls within the guidance of those. I won't read all of these off at this time. I know I've been reading a lot here anyway, but with that, The Department of Community Planning and Economic Development recommends that the Heritage Preservation Commission and City Council adopt staff findings to amend Title 23, Chapter 599 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances as follows. Text amendment to Title 23, Chapter 599, Heritage Preservation Regulations, to adopt amended regulations governing heritage preservation. And the recommended motion is that the Heritage Preservation Commission recommends that the City Council approve the text amendment to adopt amended regulations governing heritage preservation. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments from commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. I am going to start with just a procedural question for you. Can you walk us through sort of like the next steps for this from here, from today? Like where it goes next and et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you, Chair Bloomberg. From this point on, it would go up kind of through the similar council review process that you're used to other applications going, whether it's a designation that's going up through council or an appeal. So it will go to Business Housing and Zoning Committee for their vote on adoption. So that will also be a public hearing. And then from that point, it goes up through the council process and ultimately would be signed by the mayor. I don't know if I'm missing anything specifically that other staff wants to add on.
Thank you. Andrea Burke, Supervisor for the Historic Preservation Team in CPED. Yeah, Rob is correct. Basically, from here, this will be for public comment, and then the official public hearing will be at the Business Housing and Zoning Committee, where that committee will make a recommendation on adoption but to the council, to the mayor, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, are there questions for staff? Commissioner Melblom.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. I have a series of questions. Mr. Skolecki, in section 599.70, period of decision, section 2B, it says demolition of potential historic resource. No approval of a demolition of potential historic resource granted by the Heritage Preservation Commission or City Council shall be valid for a period of longer than 5 years from the date of such approval, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that 5 years? That seems to me to be an extraordinarily long amount of time.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, thank you for that question. That is something that staff had, talked about in depth kind of internally about what would be an appropriate timeline. And we did settle on 5 years because we believed it's not too soon. It's also not, it's not too long of a time. So in that way, when we're looking at properties, I guess maybe I'll start with two. With most applications that come in front of you all, the timeline on that decision after you vote on it is 2 years with the extension of a 1 year extension. So potentially 3 years, 2 to 3 years. So with that, staff, we were thinking of how these types of projects really develop, and also at what point does it make sense to reevaluate the history of a property in a way that, if something was denied and then it comes back 5 years later, that's a sufficient amount of time for staff to consider, if anything has changed. And that goes the same way for, approving demolitions too, right? If HPC approves a demolition and then that does not happen, the permit is not submitted, or someone else purchases the property, and then that comes back to HPC. It just gives staff a decent amount of time, but not too much relative to other land use applications, to be able to reconsider certain histories.
Aren't typically demolition of potential historic resources, aren't those a lot of times done because there's damage or the building is unsafe? Or are many of them just done because the owner doesn't want that particular building anymore? I'm trying to get my head around it because it seems like since I've been on the commission, most of these that we've granted are because the building was unsafe and therefore it was a hazard, so it should have come down quickly. And I'm just wondering, do we approve things? Do we approve demolition actions on a potential historic resource that really have no justification other than maybe the homeowner or the building owner doesn't want that building anymore? Like there's not a cause other than maybe economic.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, I think so what you mentioned too is every property that comes in front of you all for review as a demolition of historic resource now, so demolition of potential historic resource under the new ordinance, will still be evaluated in a very similar way. So each property is going to be different, and it's really up to the applicant and the property owner to be able to make their case under the required findings based on their specific property. So, in a case where, as you've seen recently, maybe an applicant's able to make a case that a property is in a dangerous condition structurally, and the HPC is able to vote to approve that, and it's not appealed. That decision is good for 5 years. I would say it's extremely unlikely that a property owner wouldn't proceed for demolition within those 5 years if their argument is based on, that there are issues that need to be remedied as soon as possible, and that demolition is the way to do that. So, does that answer your question?
Mostly, yes. In section 599.210 5C, jurisdiction and authority, final action. The Heritage Preservation Commission shall make final decisions on the following matters in the administration of this chapter, subject to applicable appeals of the Commission's decisions. One of my concerns about the rewrite of this is it seems to give the planning director an extraordinary amount of power that didn't exist previously. And my perception, and this is fed by talking to a lot of other people in the historic area, more so than I would have realized from the beginning, is that it feels as if this is setting up a dynamic where the planning director can overrule actions by the HPC, and I find that problematic for many reasons. So with this particular section, 599.2105C, does that mean that the planning official cannot override any of these decisions? So if they're appealed, they would go to the city council, but the staff cannot actually override our decisions.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, I believe that's correct based on what you mentioned. So, all these points in the section of the text that you've pointed out are, those are giving you as the commission literally the ability to have the authority of the final action of those. So again, it's subject to appeal processes. So I guess too, is there other concern you see with where it's noted for a planning director involvement? I guess I'm trying to grasp the concern here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. This is where I'm not an attorney, so the legalese sometimes it seems very convoluted, although I will thank you all for putting most of this in what I think is pretty straightforward, easy to understand, common American English, so thank you for that. But there's still some legalese somewhere, and so I still have this sense of concern about that. Let me move on.
I think staff have additional comments to that.
Oh.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Melblom. I just want to add on to what Rob said. To answer your question in just a different way, no, staff has absolutely no authority whatsoever to override the HPC's decision. That is very clear in here. And by staff, I mean the planning director. The planning director and staff are basically assumed as the same entity in this draft, and which was also in the previous draft. It's very similar. This section is very similar to the previous draft for planning director authority. We teased out a lot of the things, though, that the planning director as staff were already doing, but were not codified, to basically provide some transparency as to all the duties that we do, and to to make it very clear what the HPC has jurisdiction on and what the planning director has jurisdiction on. But to make it just very abundantly clear, no, we cannot override anything that you do. You do your thing, and we have our responsibilities. It's
Okay.
kind of behind the scenes.
Thank you for that clarification, because when I was then looking at section 599.220, the planning director, again, it talks planning director through a lot of things, and my assumption is this is like saying mayor, and the mayor doesn't actually do a lot of things. They empower other people below them, and my assumption is where it says planning director, the planning director is actually empowering you three, you Mr. Skalecki, Ms. Kay, and yourself to actually carry out and do these things. It's not that person is anticipated to do it themselves. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's actually super helpful. In section 599.230, City Council, it says the City Council shall have the following powers and duties in connection with the administration of this chapter, and there's 5 sections. Numbers 3 and 4. Number 3 is to designate landmarks in historic districts, to amend designations, to remove landmarks from designation. Number 4 is to adopt and amend design guidelines for landmarks in historic districts. Is that always, did that remain unchanged from previous, or is that new language?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, I believe that is similar language, if not the same, from when we last presented this to you back in May. So there shouldn't be any really new information within that.
Okay. Section 599.300, which is the application procedures and fees. Number, let's see, I think it's 3C2. It's extension of time. It says, upon written request by the applicant, the planning director may, for good cause shown and without any notice of hearing, grant extensions to any time limit imposed on an applicant by these application procedures. So there's no, my reading of that means that the planning director could say, you've got 5 years. Is that, or you have 3 days, or you have 5 years. It's fully up to that individual. Is that correct? And sorry if you're not fighting that. It's 599.300 A, B. I think it's C number 2. It's on page 15 of the PDF.
Thanks, Commissioner Melblom. I'm just trying to find other areas of text where I believe this is clarified through application reviews. So the answer is I don't believe that's the case. The language here is really written to, in some ways, mirror what is used in zoning code for decision-making processes. So I'm not aware of a time that, approval's been granted indefinitely. And I'm trying to find the other area where I believe this is clarified, but.
Okay. Section 599.310, public hearings, A, number 1. It says the planning director shall publish notice of the time, place, and purpose of the public hearing at least once, not less than 10 calendar days before the hearing in a newspaper or general circulation. Was any consideration given to the fact that very few people read newspapers anymore? I mean, I feel like a fossil, the fact that I still read the newspaper. So I'm wondering, are there actually better venues to get the public notice out in the public?
Mr. Skalecki, if you'd like, I can take that question.
Sure.
So Finance and Commerce, which is even less well-read than the Star Tribune or Pioneer Press, is the newspaper of record for the city, and it is in all of our ordinances that, yes, although very few people read the newspaper, there's a lot of, we're guided by ordinances, right, which is law. And so, like, you can't prove something unless it's written down, so we have to publish it somewhere. And so, yes, we also go to great lengths to find other ways to reach people. We have a email list. We post things on the website. But unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be any way to get around that particular requirement, in my opinion. But I'd be happy to check with the clerk.
Okay. No, thank you. That's helpful. It just struck me a little unusual that we would still be thinking of newspapers. Section 599.620, potential historic resource requirement. The last sentence of that says nominations submitted by a member of the city council or the mayor shall be exempt from this requirement. Why is that the case? I believe this was a change that you all made specifically to add in the whole process of potential historic resources as a step in this process.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Malblum. That is, I know, one that has been brought up in previous discussion with HPC commissioners. And that's one really that we looked at under the guidance of the city attorney's office and other planning staff in discussion with, currently we don't have the same guidelines or guidance for how a property is nominated. Mm-hmm. We are working internally, as I mentioned in my presentation, to try to clarify what a potential historic resource is and how those can be found. So that kind of goes along with it. With that, kind of when an elected official or the mayor would bring forward a nomination, staff noted that, they are elected as people to represent their constituents. So with that, place within the government, we understood that they could continue to nominate properties as kind of we currently do now. That, of course, means nominations are still, they go through the same process as with a public hearing to ensure that they actually do, meet the criteria to be nominated. And we've even clarified what the findings are for that. So there are many kind of points in the process where a nomination can be considered by, whoever may be submitting it, depending on if they're elected official or a property owner or a commissioner in this situation.
Okay, thank you. 599.630, item C, required findings or criteria. I believe that you're missing the word commission. It says the Heritage Preservation may approve or deny the nomination. I think you mean to say the Heritage Preservation Commission may approve or deny the nomination. I don't know if that's correct or not, but it seemed to me when I was reading through it that was. In 599.650, interim protection, it says the interim protection shall be, this is item B under that. Interim protection shall be in effect from the date of the Heritage Preservation Commission's decision to commence a designation study of a property or collection of properties until the City Council makes a decision regarding the designation or for 16 months, whichever comes first. Interim protection may not be extended. In your opinion, will this stop the problem of something being looked at and said, yeah, that could be potentially historic, and then it's sitting on the books for, in some cases, I believe some of these are early studies from the 1980s. So would this stop that problem from continuing? Is that the intent of this?
Commissioner Melblom, I don't know if interim protection here is linked with kind of the nomination process that you noted. So to me, it sounds like you may have concerns about properties that were identified as potentially historic, but not, brought forward for nomination. In this part of the text, the interim protection really just applies to properties that have been approved for their nomination and can be placed under interim protection.
Okay. Thank you. And then I believe this is my last comment or question. Under 599.740, the designation and procedure decision, item C, it says designation decision. The City Council shall have 180 days to take final action on the designation following the Heritage Preservation Commission's recommendation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does this resolve the problem of something like the Glendale Townhome Community Project, which is now, my understanding, has been referred back to staff? And this is the second time this project has come before the Heritage Preservation Commission. Both times we recommended it be designated, and basically the City Council is appearing, it appears, that they're punting on making a decision, and now I believe they're sending it back to staff with no instructions, so it's basically going to live in purgatory for a while. Would this necessitate the City Council to make a decision within 180 days, either say yes or no? They can't refer it to committees or basically make the issue go away quietly without them taking action. Is that accurate? Is that the intent of this? Or is that will that cause that to happen?
Commissioner Melblom, this was certainly one of the most recent parts of the text that we added, kind of based on things that we had seen in the past few years. In some ways, this really does ensure that City Council is making a decision on a designation, or at least, through the text, they're guided towards a decision. Right now, there's a timeline that can be made. So for scenarios where, commissioners have voted on something and it needs to go up through the council process, this is hopefully a way to kind of make sure that council is being accountable with themselves on trying to make a decision on that.
When you say hopefully, I interpret that as still being a little squishy. Do you mean that does this basically require them to make?
Yeah, sorry, you can finish, but I also want to jump in on that comment before you answer that.
Make some sort of final decision so that things don't get moved into what I think of as political purgatory.
Yeah, I have a sort of, I guess it's a similar question, because I think that the way that I am reading it, it actually is saying that if a decision goes to the City Council and the City Council does not make a decision on it, it doesn't say that a decision has to be made. It says that a new nomination for the same designation may not be submitted for a period of 3 years. So the way that I'm reading it, it is actually saying that if it goes to City Council and the City Council doesn't make a decision, then it drops again and nothing can happen for 3 years.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, I think, Chair Bjornberg, your interpretation of that is the scenario that staff kind of wrote it to try to make sure that, again, the decision's being made, and if there is no decision, or if it's denied, then someone can't, bring a nomination forward for 3 years from the end of that time frame.
Or this gives the city council the ability to let something just die on the vine without taking any action of it because of whatever reason they choose to not, in my job, do their job. That was more of a comment than a question. That ends my questions, Mr. Skulicki. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Melville.
Thank you, Commissioner Melblom. Are there other questions for staff from commissioners? I will also add, I know that we do also get discussion after this, so. Commissioner Hare.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. Mr. Skulicki, in that same light as we were talking on that same subject, it says in the absence of the decision within the 180 days, or should they deny a designation, a new nomination may not be submitted for a period of 3 years from the end of the 180 days. What about the denial of a designation, or is there no possibility of renominating something that is denied by City Council?
Chair Bloomberg, Commissioner Hare, that's a point that staff certainly discussed. As you may know, in our current ordinance, we don't really have guidance on, if someone can renominate something if it's been denied. I certainly am not aware of a situation where City Council has denied a landmark or historic district and then someone has wanted to renominate it, within 3 years. So this is kind of more so to give guidance on if that situation would ever come forward. And, it is potentially possible that, a landmark is denied for one designation because a certain history was studied, and then within 3 to 5 years' time, something else was discovered at the property where someone else would want to bring a nomination forward to recognize a different history at that property. And then, of course, that's evaluated differently by staff. So this is just to give maybe a bit clearer guidance on that situation if it would come forward in the future.
Thank you.
Are there other questions from commissioners for staff? Oh, staff, sorry.
Thank you, Chair Bloomberg. To just add a little bit more to what your question and Rob's explanation, which was spot on for that section, Commissioner Hare, to just give a little bit of background, previous guidance we had received was that once a designation had been decided by the council, that it was decided in perpetuity. This allows an avenue for a property if it was denied by the council for whatever reason. The council changes, the world changes, politics change, properties change. This allows an avenue for somebody to bring forth a nomination in the future should that situation happen, whereas that was not previously the case in the way our previous ordinance was written and interpreted. So this kind of wraps all of that up and creates, as Rob said, some avenues to make it possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Other questions for staff from commissioners? Commissioner Corrado.
I'll try to see if I can phrase this. Under 599.230, the responsibility of the City Council, items 3 and 4 both include the word to either to amend the designation or to amend design guidelines. I know we previously discussed if this meant that City Council's role is to approve amendments that were recommended from the HPC, or if they had the purview under their right to change any specific points within the guidelines that are submitted as recommended from this body.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Corrado, within that, council does have the ability, so whether it is to, I guess I'll start with amend designated or designation. So that essentially is one of the areas of text that is more so being clarified than changed. So that's a question that's come forward to staff in the past of, say we do have a landmark, kind of a similar example. We have a landmark that's designated for a certain history, but we now know more about it. We want to, study it, expand the period of significance, maybe, for certain boundaries or historic districts, expand the boundaries. What this is saying is basically the process starts over again. So it's as if you're studying another landmark or historic district. And that's kind of clarified in the section of text that, notes designation and clarifies the different processes for when things go back to HPC, when things can be reviewed administratively, things like that. For the design guidelines, I know this was a kind of a question earlier on, and this was a question that staff, again, had a lot of internal conversations with the city attorney's office and other planning staff on council's ability to amend and adopt design guidelines. And ultimately, the consensus at the end is that council, as the elected body that, HPC's items go to, essentially, should have the ability to make changes to those where they see fit and vote on those, understanding that, as council does with all bodies that have items going to council, they're taking your expertise into consideration in that adoption, in potentially making changes. So they are taking the guidance of whatever staff is recommending, whatever HPC votes on, and considering that in their decision.
Thank you.
Commissioner Maston.
I just have a follow-up question to that process. Does it go from us to Biz and then City Council? So is Biz also adding on recommendations?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Maston, it would go to Biz, and it kind of depends on, a lot of times when we do have items like a designation going to Biz, it might be placed on a consent agenda and just adopted as is. I think that's something that staff would have to consider with, other staff of how this takes place going forward. But we do have the framework in place of how items from HPC go to Business, Housing, and Zoning Committee, and then through that process, it essentially gets placed on a council agenda. That's almost never going to be a public hearing, and then, from that point, council is voting on what Biz had approved in their meeting, and then it goes to council up through the mayor's office and is signed, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Last call. Okay, thank you for that. I will now open the floor for public comment for this item. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak for or against this? Please step forward and state your name and address for the record.
Carol Merrill, 333 East Hennepin Avenue, Minneapolis, 55414. Good evening, Commissioners. As a former member of this commission, it was my honor and good fortune to serve with a group of individuals clearly dedicated to the preservation and protection of this city's historic resources. Apart from having an interest in preservation, those who serve on this commission are also required to have education, demonstrated expertise, and/or experience in fields related to historic preservation, architecture, architectural history, and building rehabilitation. This requirement is to ensure that the standards of the ordinance are appropriately and reasonably interpreted in the review of proposed alterations or new construction, and that proposed designations are evaluated based on an educated understanding of significance and integrity. I am here today to express my fear that if adopted, the revisions to Chapter 599 grant substantial decision-making to the planning director, a person with no background in historic preservation the ability to overrule the commissioners. This will unduly limit the role of the HPC and ultimately undermine the intent and the integrity of the city's historic program. Historic preservation is a key component of any successful municipal planning program, especially in a community rich in historic resources. Administration of a preservation ordinance based on best practices in the field ensures that the community can effectively steward its historic resources, manage change within historic neighborhoods, and implementation of the city's planning program, and while the planning director oversees the overall direction and implementation of the city's planning program and may extremely well qualified in various areas of the field. Historic preservation is a specialized area of expertise requiring the knowledge and experience of preservation experts to evaluate and recommend actions affecting historic resources and neighborhoods. And while the proposed changes to the current decision-making authority may be well-intentioned, as staff speaks of, I'm not here to argue the changes that will streamline the process, but I will add that during the HPC's public review process, applicants benefit from the Commission's discussion and explanation of findings. They come away from the review knowing that their project was considered by individuals with the requisite knowledge and expertise to make informed decisions based on ordinance standards. The public, especially any interested party, is assured of the same. It is for this reason that I encourage the Commission to ask staff to revise the document before you, making the changes necessary to return decision-making authority to the HPC. I do thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Howard, 3333 Holmes Avenue South, former commissioner, and thank you for inviting us up to speak today. We all know why this revision was needed. It especially makes complete sense to streamline the processes that we've all been working with that are outdated, clarify terms that have been there for a long time, especially in relation to demolition, which is kind of the spark behind all of this. But by equating this commission's process with those of the other independent bodies of the city, it stifles what makes this commission really special. You are part of the National Preservation Partnership that includes state, tribal, local, and federal governments. No other independent body of the city plays a similar role in a partnership with governmental entities and the public. I believe this revision will hamstring your ability to serve as the professional expertise that's needed in local government. This is a service that only you, along with the city's professionally qualified staff, can truly provide. I'm sad to see development rights go, even though they were never used. I'm sad to see the conservation districts go, even though those were never used, although they tried. And I'm concerned about some of the timeframes that have been introduced, as commissioners have already asked questions on. But my primary concerns are that these changes seem to emphasize that you are only an advisory body. This runs counter to the state certified local government program requirement that commissions not be a pointless part of decision-making. I see nothing that prevents BIS or city council, bodies that have no preservation professionals, the ability to change the scope of designations and now design guidelines. I need only point to Dinkytown to show how that can be really counterproductive. Your power as preservation professionals to nominate landmarks will now need an application for a determination of eligibility first, rather than simply nominate the property. Now, in my time on the commission, I think I'm the only one who did that, but I know that it's been done since I've left. Neither the city council nor the mayor must meet that requirement, understandably. They're elected officials, they represent the public. But the general public has to meet that requirement, and now that includes you, the preservation experts that are charged with implementing preservation here in the city. In closing, as a historian with futuristic tendencies, as I often say, I believe Minneapolis must continue to acknowledge and celebrate its diverse history as it evolves and grows. Now is the time to make sure that you retain the Commission's expertise in our city's preservation program. You are not the same as other city bodies. You are a critical voice in the National Preservation Partnership created by federal code and state law. Use your voice now so it cannot continue to be muffled as it has been in the past. And I want to thank you all and all the city staff here today for all of your service to the city. It truly is appreciated, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you for those comments. Are there any others who wish to speak either for or against this item? Seeing none, I'll close the floor. Commissioners, let's discuss. Who wants to kick this off? I am happy to start. I first sort of want to say, like, a note of appreciation. I know that this has been a long time in the works. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and I know that staff have spent a lot of time on this, and I do want to make sure to sort of give appreciation for that. I will say that I feel like it has been a little bit of a frustrating process, and that we have talked about it a lot, and I feel like a lot of the feedback and comments that we have given are not really reflected in here, and I feel like they've come up in questions, they've come up from public comments, and I don't really know what the resolution for that looks like. I think that sort of similar to a lot of the conversation that we have had over, I don't know, the past years, and tonight, I have a big concern about the role of the planning director in this and the lack of qualification requirements for it. I think that, like, again, in best intentions, that system works out in the way that it has been working because we have qualified people in that role. But I think that, you know, the last, I'm like, what month is it? It's September. The last while, we have seen sort of people in the political realm get appointed to roles without necessarily having qualifications for that. And so I think that that is just a reality of, you know, this works if somebody who is sort of experienced and appreciates preservation and has that skill set is in that role, but without anything requiring that, somebody could be appointed to that role and sort of make a lot of decisions without what feels like sort of having that checks and balances. So I think that that's sort of one of my big concerns with this. I don't know if other people want to comment on that or if I should move on to the next thing. Commissioner Melblom?
No, go ahead.
I think, again, some of these sort of timelines are a little bit concerning to me. This demolition delay of 90 days feels like it's a little bit quick. And similarly, the nomination requirements, I think that I understand sort of the thought process behind asking people to sort of do that initial legwork. I think that it becomes really cumbersome for nominating. I think that it's already not like the simplest thing to do. And then I also sort of think that I have heard us sort of talk about, you know, the city council and the mayor are elected officials, so they shouldn't have to do the legwork. But I sort of am like, but if a neighborhood has a majority and they are nominating their neighborhood, why should they have to do the legwork sort of that? Because they're a majority of it. So I have some concerns about that. I understand that it will sort of streamline the work that is required for that, but I think it is just sort of putting the onus on other groups. And then I think that we have really good examples of, in recent history, challenges with both this city council 180 days. If it's dropped, it goes nowhere. I'm like, we have a recent example of what happens here and know that it's a challenge. And I think that I would have sort of preferred to see that saying, like, if after 180 days a decision isn't made, then the recommendation is accepted, right? I think that if they're not going to accept it, then it can get dropped. And then similar with city council's ability to amend recommendations. We are here because, we are qualified. We have a passion for this. This is what we do. This is what we sort of like live and feel and are trained in and are making recommendations. And I think that that is the best use of our skills, especially making recommendations to other folks to then make a motion on. And I think that at some point we did talk about, is there a way to write into here that the city council still has the ability to, accept or deny things, but removing the ability to amend, because I think that that is really where problems occur, right? I think that Dinkytown is a recent memory of an example of how that can sort of go astray. Other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Malblum.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. For several of the reasons that you just said, I'm going to vote against this. And I say that, two things about that. I feel kind of bad because I know that the staff has worked extensively on this over the past year. I've had voluminous amounts of questions because that's my nature as it's gone through each time. I believe that it's been shown to us, but it wasn't until the last couple of months that I actually had a lot of people in the historic preservation community talk to me about this. And the big concern was generally the authority. This feels like it gives the planning director, and I appreciate, Andrea, your comment about that is not the intention. So I feel a little bit better than that, but I still don't feel like 100% like that's satisfied. The biggest issue with me is the pass that the city council gets to be able to rewrite anything that comes to them, and to, like they've done with, seemingly have done with Glendale, townhome community, is to move that nomination into purgatory and then nothing ever comes of it. I just find that reprehensible, that they can't just take a vote on it and make a decision and move forward. Even if I disagree with them, it feels like we need to force them to take action on things. So the fact that this 599.740C basically, and I appreciate Chair Bloomberg's clarification for me and her reading of it, because now that makes perfect sense, that after 180 days, they don't need to do anything. I think it should, I agree with Chair Bjornberg that it should be rewritten to say that after 180 days, if no final action has been taken, then the Heritage Preservation Commission's recommendation shall become the accepted outcome of the whole process, and that should become the judgment on the issue. I understand the 3-year delay so that these things don't become a nuisance, but I also think about Glendale Townhome in particular was submitted by Councilmember Gordon, and nothing happened, and then he termed off, or he chose not to run for re-election. And then Councilmember Walmsley then was elected to his seat where he had been on the city council, and then she put this back through, and now she's being stalled out, and that just seems wrong. That seems like the bad side of politics, and I think that we can prevent that from happening. So because of that reason, I will vote no on this.
Staff?
Wanted to provide, Andrea Burke, I wanted to provide a couple points of clarification. You have a couple options tonight. You can approve this. You can approve this and recommend changes. You can deny this. The decision's yours, but if you have suggestions for changes, I encourage you to make them. And we can pass it. This is going to biz one way or the other. So it's not a, if you deny it, then we go back to the, what we do is we're going to take your recommendation and we will pass it on to the biz committee with all of that. I have a lot of things, but I don't want to take up the time because I also want to make note. It's 6:05 and we do have to wrap by 6:30. We have another item after this, which is the possibility to be continued. But I'm still hearing, I'll just say, I'm hearing a lot of questions, and it seems like items I've provided clarification, but it still seems like there's a lot of questions surrounding it. So happy to answer more questions or, continue with comments is totally fine, but just want to make sure what the options are for this evening, because if you deny, you're denying the whole thing. And then that's fine, and that's your option, but you also have the option to make recommendations for changes.
I do have a question, and then if it is different, Corrado. If we were to move forward with, I think you were saying, approve with comments, what form would that need to be? Like, do we need to set up a specific motion that says, here's our 6 comments, or is it you are able to prepare a memo based off of the comments that have been heard tonight?
I'm actually going to direct that question to Jason Wittenberg, since you are more experienced in ordinance amendments. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jason Wittenberg, Planning Manager in CPED. So, Chair, your action would essentially be to make recommendations generally about what you would like to see change. You don't need to wordsmith specific code text on the floor to make recommendations. We would take your guidance and type that up into a memo that does our best to communicate your intent to the City Council. Of course, we would prefer that be as specific as possible, to provide as specific guidance as possible about which section you'd like to be changed and what your intent is for how that should read.
Thank you. Is there also any option to continue this item? I did not realize that we were on a clock for tonight, so I'm just curious about that since it is 6:07 and if we have to be done by 6:30.
Chair Bernberg, yes, you can continue the item if that is what you decide to do.
Okay, thank you for some of that clarification. Is there another question for staff? Okay. Commissioner Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Bernberg. I guess I have questions about what it looks like. Say we did choose to deny and then it goes to biz anyways. They're just, I guess, what do they then, how are they likely to look at that? Would they really consider it, or would they really just be passing it on from there? I mean, are they going to be kind of taking a line-by-line look at this as well?
Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Rodriguez, they will take your comments and they will take your recommendation and consider it as a whole, because we're going to hold a public hearing. Tonight since we noticed for the meeting, we just held public comment, but the official public hearing will be held at the Biz Committee. And so they will take it, they will look at this afresh, they will take your consideration and decide whether or not they recommend approval of the text amendment or denial of the text amendment, or actually I may have to turn to Jason for that answer. I'm a little in uncharted territory, but they decide whether or not it moves on to the city council. And I'm going to pause for a moment and divert to Jason.
Yeah, Commissioners, I think they would presumably have questions for us about the Commission's rationale for recommending denial, and we would communicate that to the best of our knowledge, highlighting the biggest sticking points for the Commission if the recommendation out of this body is to not approve the ordinance. I would suggest that if there are particular sticking points, that it's probably more helpful for the City Council to see what those are from you and what your recommendations are to change those. But again, I don't want to imply that that recommendation of denial is not within your purview, because clearly it is.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. I don't have questions. I just have comments that I would like to make, feedback on how I would like to see this going forward. So I thought I would share with all of you to get your feedback and thoughts. Definitely, I would like to strengthen the HPC's final authority. I'd like to have us have more binding power, less advisory power in certain things, such as adoption of design guidelines, determinations of local eligibility, and interim protections. And I want to also limit escalations to council, because I do want to allow council appeals, but I would have those require deference to HPC findings. So council can only overturn an HPC decision with a majority vote, ideally. I would also love to narrow the planning director's discretion, particularly as it comes to eligibility determinations. I would like the HPC, not the planning director, to make the final determination of whether a property is a potential historic resource. And with that, I would also like to bypass the Heritage Preservation Commission from having to go that extra step. I think that as the professionals, we should be able to make that determination of whether we believe it's worthy of nomination. And then I would also like to, expand the HPC's role in designation guidelines. So to require the HPC, not City Council, to have final approval on historic design guidelines, obviously with council oversight, limited to funding and implementation primarily. And I'd like to give the HPC, not the planning director, the final authority to amend designations. Obviously, some stronger appeal rights. I would like easier for community members to appeal planning director decisions to the HPC as well. And that's most of my comments that I have. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Corrado.
Just based on all our comments, it does seem like a continuance, and if we could just all come back next time with specific section numbers and paragraphs that we would like to see work on, so that's perhaps more useful when we come back with recommendations.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's sort of like where my mind was at too, is it seems like there's a lot of comments that we each have on this, and that if it would be most beneficial to sort of be able to deliver those specific comments that, and I'm also like, I don't know how we're going to sort of put together and agree on comments in the next 15 minutes even. So it does sort of feel like that might be a smart choice if we were able to look at continuing it. Commissioner Melblom.
Yeah, I believe we have to make a motion for that. So if that's the case, I will make a motion that we continue this item to our next meeting.
Corrado seconds.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on that for now? Okay, would the clerk call the roll on continuing that item?
Commissioner Alexander.
Aye.
Hare.
Aye.
Corrado.
Aye.
Melblom.
Aye.
Rodriguez.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Vice Chair Maston.
Aye.
Chair Bjornberg.
Aye.
There are 8 ayes.
Thank you. That motion passes. That concludes our public hearing items. Our last item is item number 7, beach naming request from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Staff memo is presented by Aaron Kay.
Good evening, Chair Bjornberg and Commissioners. My name is Erin Kay, and I'm a Senior City Planner in the Historic Preservation subsection of the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development, or CPED. I'm here today to receive your comments on a proposed naming request from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, or MPRB. When a naming request for parks and facilities comes before the MPRB, they seek comments from the Heritage Preservation Commission, as well as the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission and the State Historic Preservation Office. This request is to rename Nokomis Beach on the east side of Lake Nokomis, as shown here by the yellow arrow, to the Al Whitman 50th Street Beach. This request was submitted by Whitman's daughter, Claire Dombrock, and her husband, Tom, after Whitman passed away in 2023. Whitman served as MPRB's Assistant Superintendent for Planning and Development from 1969 to 1997, so almost 30 years. The nomination notes that Whitman was involved in the design and construction of numerous new community centers, redesign and renovation of many existing parks, acquisition of new parkland, implementation of the neighborhood revitalization program, the land purchase for what became the Cedar Lake Trail, establishment of the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden and the Walker Arts Center, redevelopment of the St. Anthony Falls area, implementation of design standards to the Grand Rounds Parkway system, and the Federal Highway Administration's designation of the Grand Rounds as a National Scenic Byway. Whitman was particularly fond of Lake Nokomis, which is why they selected this location. Considerations of naming requests should take into account the enduring quality of the individual's contribution to the park system in comparison with those of other historically significant individuals after whom park facilities have been named. These type of requests don't come before you that often. Previous requests were heard in 2023 to rename an overlook after HWS Cleveland and a trail after avid runner Rick Recker after he passed away. Staff will transmit your comments to the Park Board in a letter. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Just to clarify, you are just looking for comments from us on this. There's no decision that we're sort of making, correct?
Chair Bjornberg, that is correct.
Thank you. Commissioners, are there comments? Commissioner Corrado.
Hi. As somebody who works in landscape architecture and parks closely, it's really nice to see a nomination. And just the volume of the work, the impact of the work, and public parks are what, in my opinion, are our collective identity and how we show our value to each other. This country has a long history of establishing parks as publicly owned, maintained, and accessible to our public. So I am very supportive of this effort.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments? Commissioner Maston.
I am also in support, and thank you for stating it so well, Commissioner Corrado.
Last call. Comments. Is that enough for you?
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. We'll make sure to pass these comments along to the Park Board as they make their final decision.
Thank you. That concludes our discussion items. Do staff have any announcements?
I do, thank you. Wanted to note that the City Council, Andrea Burke, Supervisor for the Historic Preservation Team in CPED, I'll state that again. The Prince House, Prince Rogers Nelson Second Childhood Home was approved at City Council just last week, so it's still awaiting signature by the mayor and publication in Finance and Commerce, so it's not done yet, but that is a crucial step in the current ordinance language. For those of you who attended the Preserve Minnesota SHPO conference in New Ulm. Thank you for coming. Aaron had given a presentation with some of the other members of the African American Heritage Work Group and received really good feedback about that and the work group, so wanted to just pass along that good news. We also have the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions conference coming up in July of next year, and the call for session proposals is due October 6th. So if you are interested in submitting one or partnering, I encourage you to look into that. And also, I had sent out the notice for the call for proposals and reviewing that if you're interested. And then my last update is that it is open appointments right now for the HPC, for boards and commissions, including the HPC. We do, for sure, will have one seat that will become available. Technically, there are 3. We have 2 seeking reappointment, so in reality, it is 3 seats, but one for sure that will be vacant. And so I encourage you to, if you know anybody who might be interested or be a good fit for the commission, to encourage them to apply. The applications will only be received through September 30th. After that, there will be no more applications received for the next year. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Do commissioners have any announcements? Okay. With that, we have completed all items on the agenda for this meeting. There being no other business to come before this meeting, and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. The next regular meeting of the HPC is September 30th, 2025. Thank you.